Let me tell you the part that still surprises me when I think about it. The man who fired me in front of 12 colleagues on an open office floor, loud enough for people in the hallway to stop walking. That same man sent me a message 2 years later asking if I had any job openings at my company. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The person who stood in front of an audience and told me I lacked vision and drive, who packed my humiliation into a performance so that everyone around us would remember it, who watched me carry a box to the elevator without saying a single word of decency. That person needed something from me 2 years later. I did not plan for that moment. I did not work toward it or dream about it or use it as motivation on hard days. I was simply living my life, building something real. And that moment arrived on its own way. Justice sometimes does it when you stop chasing it and start focusing on yourself instead. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand what that office floor felt like before you can understand what the message felt like. My name's not important. What is important is that I spent 6 years at that company giving everything I had. I was not the loudest person in the room. I was never the one angling for attention or positioning myself in meetings or making sure my name was attached to every successful outcome. I was the one who stayed late, who noticed the problems before they became crises, who built relationships with clients so carefully and so genuinely that they asked for me by name. I was good at my job in the quiet way that people who actually care about their work tend to be good at it, not performing competence, just having it. David had been my manager for 2 of those 6 years. He was the kind of person who mistook confidence for intelligence and volume for leadership. He filled rooms with his presence in a way that impressed people who did not know better and exhausted people who did. I knew better by month 3 of working under him. I smiled and nodded and kept doing excellent work anyway, because I was there for the job and the clients and the craft, not for him. What I did not realize until it was too late was that David had been watching me the way insecure people watch. Anyone who makes them feel less certain about themselves, not with admiration, with calculation, with the slow, quiet decision that I was going to become a problem he needed to solve before I became a threat he could not manage. I did not see it coming. That is the honest truth. I should have, but I was too busy doing good work to notice that someone nearby had decided to punish me for it. The morning it happened was an ordinary morning. That is the thing nobody tells you about the moments that change your life. They rarely announce themselves. They arrive inside regular days, disguised as nothing. And by the time you understand what is happening, it is already happening. I had coffee at my desk. I reviewed a client file I had been working on for 2 weeks. I responded to 3 emails. I said good morning to the colleagues I liked and nodded at the ones I did not. It was a Tuesday. Nothing about it felt different from any other Tuesday. David called my name from across the office floor at 10:30 in the morning, not from his office doorway, not with a knock on my desk, not with a meeting invitation or a calendar hold. He called my name from across the open floor in a voice that was already slightly too loud for the room, and when I looked up, every head in the office turned with mine. I walked toward him. I remember being confused more than anything else, not afraid, just genuinely uncertain about what was happening. He was standing near the center of the room, not near any office or conference room or private space, just standing there in the open. And as I got closer, I could see something in his expression that I had not seen before, a kind of readiness, like he had been preparing for this and was finally arriving. At the moment, he had rehearsed. He told me the company was making changes. He said my role was being eliminated. He said the team needed people with stronger vision and more drive, and that, after careful consideration, they had determined I was not the right fit for where the company was going. He said all of this loudly, clearly, and without once suggesting we take the conversation somewhere private. I stood there and I listened and I understood with a horrible, clarifying certainty that this was not an accident. The location was chosen, the volume was chosen, the audience was chosen. This was not a layoff. This was a message delivered in public so that the memory of it would live in every person who witnessed it, so that I would carry not just the loss of the job, but the weight of their eyes watching me lose it. I said very little. I do not remember exactly what I said. Something brief and composed that I am still mildly proud of given the circumstances. I went to my desk. I put my things in a box. The mundane ritual of workplace endings, the coffee mug, the small plant, the charger, the framed photo. Someone held the elevator door open for me. I do not know who it was. I did not look up. I rode down alone and walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat and stared in the steering wheel for a very long time. And then I drove home, and then I cried. And then, about 3 weeks later, I got up and I got angry. And anger, I have learned, is just motivation that has finally lost its patience. The 3 weeks between the elevator and the anger were not easy. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. There's a version of the story where I walk out of that office building and immediately transform into someone focused and determined and clear-eyed about the future. That is not what happened. What happened was that I went home and I stayed there. I canceled plans. I stopped cooking real food. I watched television. I cannot remember and slept at hours that made no sense and had long, circular conversations with myself in the middle of the night about every choice I had made in the last 6 years that had led me to that moment on that office floor. I questioned everything, my talent, my judgment, my instincts, the way I had trusted a workplace that was never actually safe, the way I had made myself useful to people who saw. Usefulness is something to extract and discard. I had given 6 years to that company, 6 years of staying late and caring deeply and doing work I was proud of. And the return on that investment was a public humiliation delivered by a man who needed an audience to feel powerful. That realization sat in my chest like a stone for 3 weeks. And then one morning I woke up and I was not sad anymore. I was furious. Not the heart-reactive kind of fury that makes you send emails you regret. The cold, quiet kind. The kind that clarifies rather than distorts. The kind that asks, very calmly, "What are you going to do about this?" The answer I gave myself was the same answer. I had been circling for years without ever committing to it. I was going to start my own consulting firm. I had the skills. I had the client relationships, because those were mine regardless of what David had decided about my employment. I had 6 years of industry, knowledge, and a professional reputation that one bad manager on one Tuesday morning could not erase, no matter how loud he was. What I had lacked until that moment was the anger necessary to stop waiting for permission. I started the same week, not with a grand gesture or a dramatic announcement, just with a document, a real plan, numbers and projections, and a realistic assessment of what I had and what I needed. I called 2 former clients directly, explained that I had gone independent, and asked if they would consider working with me in a consulting capacity. Both said yes before the week was out. The third call I made was to a woman I had met at an industry conference 2 years earlier who had built her own firm from nothing. I asked if she had an hour. She gave me 2. She told me things I needed to hear, including several things that were uncomfortable, and I took notes on all of it. That document and those 3 phone calls were the foundation of everything that came after. Building the firm was the hardest thing I had ever done and also the most alive I had ever felt. Those 2 things coexisted constantly, and I stopped being surprised by that about 3 months in. There were weeks where the work was exhilarating, where I could feel myself becoming someone more capable than the person I had been inside that office building, someone whose decisions were entirely her own, and whose standards were set by herself rather than by a man who measured performance by its visibility. And there were weeks where the uncertainty was almost physical, where the gap between where I was and where I needed to be felt enormous in a way that made sleep difficult and focus harder. I learned to sit with both. The first year was lean. I will not pretend otherwise. I had savings and I was careful with them, and I said yes to every legitimate opportunity that came my way, regardless of whether it was the most glamorous work. Small projects, mid-sized projects. One fairly large project that stretched my capacity and taught me more in 3 months than I had learned in 2 years at my previous job. I showed up to every single one of them with the same standard: thorough, reliable, focused entirely on the client's actual needs, rather than on the performance of meeting them. Word spread the way it does when the work is genuinely good. By the end of the first year, I had a small but real client base. By the middle of the second year, I had brought on 2 contractors to help manage the workload. By the end of the second year, I had an office, a team, and a waiting list. I also had something harder to quantify but equally important. I had a relationship with my own capabilities. That was completely different from anything I had experienced in 6 years of employment. When you work for someone else, even when you work well, there is always a ceiling constructed by someone else's perception of you. Your growth is filtered through their willingness to see it. When you work for yourself, that ceiling disappears, and what replaces? It is both more frightening and more honest. The only limits are the ones you have not yet figured out how to exceed. I had spent 6 years being capped by David's imagination. 2 years on my own had shown me what I was actually capable of when nobody else's smallness was in the way. I thought about the office floor sometimes, not obsessively, not with bitterness, but in the way you think about a turning point when you are far enough from it to see its shape clearly. He had meant it as an ending. He had staged it as a conclusion. A final word delivered publicly so that no one who witnessed it would forget who had the power. What he had actually done was remove every reason I had to stay comfortable. He had taken away the cage and called it punishment. I have never stopped being grateful for that. Even though gratitude was the last thing I expected to feel about it, the message arrived on a Thursday afternoon in November, roughly 2 years after the elevator ride. I was at my desk reviewing a proposal when my phone showed a LinkedIn notification. I opened it without much thought, the way you do when you are in the middle of something else, expecting the usual connection request or industry update. It was from David. The message was professional in tone, measured in a way that felt carefully constructed. He mentioned that he had heard good things about my firm. He said he had been going through a transition period himself, that his role at the company had recently changed, and that he was exploring new opportunities. He said he had always respected my work ethic. He asked if there were any openings at my company that might be a good fit for his background. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and I sat very still for a moment. I want to tell you that I felt nothing, that I had grown so far beyond that. Tuesday morning, that the message registered as completely neutral information. That would not be true. What I felt was something complicated that took me a few minutes to untangle. There was a thread of satisfaction in it. I will not pretend otherwise. The particular satisfaction of a story arriving at its logical conclusion. There was also something that surprised me, a kind of clarity about how small the moment actually was compared to everything that had been built since. He was not a villain in an ongoing story. He was a person who had made a choice that revealed his character, and that choice had set off a sequence of events that led me somewhere I would not have reached otherwise. I was not angry sitting there reading that message. I was not triumphant. I was just someone with a company to run and a proposal to finish, and this message was a small and somewhat ironic interruption in an otherwise productive Thursday. I replied the following morning. I kept it brief and professional and warm because that is how I conduct myself, and that does not change based on who is on the receiving end. I told him that we were not currently hiring, but that I wished him well in his search. I did not remind him of the office floor. I did not reference the box or the elevator or the 12 people who watched. I did not need to. The existence of my reply, sent from the email address of the company I had built, said everything that needed to be said without a single word about the past. I have thought a lot about what I would tell someone who is standing where I was standing on that Tuesday. Someone sitting in a parking lot with a box on the passenger seat and no idea what comes next. Someone whose confidence has just been publicly dismantled by a person who needed them smaller. Because I think the most dangerous thing that happens in those moments is not the loss itself. The loss is painful, but it is survivable. The dangerous thing is the story you tell yourself about what the loss means. David standing on that office floor and saying those words out loud in front of those people, he was not delivering a verdict about my abilities. He was revealing something about his own fear. People who are genuinely secure in their leadership do not need an audience for a termination. They do not choose the center of a room over a private office. They do not perform someone else's diminishment as a way of confirming their own authority. The performance told me everything about him. I just was not in a position to read it clearly at the time because I was too busy absorbing the impact to analyze the source. What I know now, and what I wish I could hand to the version of myself sitting in that parking lot, is this: the story he told about you is not the true one. It is the one that was useful to him. Those are two completely different things. And the distance between them is where your actual life is waiting. You are allowed to grieve what you lost. You are allowed to sit in the parking lot for as long as you need. Cry if you need to. Sleep too much for a few weeks. Let the hurt be what it is without rushing it towards something more productive. But when the anger comes, and it will come, do not waste it on him. Spend it on yourself. Spend it on the thing you have been putting off because the timing was not right, or the confidence was not there, or the circumstances were not perfect. The circumstances will never be perfect. The timing will never announce itself. The confidence comes from doing the thing, not from waiting until you feel ready to do it. Start with what you have. Start from where you are. Start before you feel like you know what you're doing. Because none of us know what we are doing at the beginning, and the ones who succeed are simply the ones who begin anyway and figure it out as they go. Here is where I am now because I think you deserve to know how the story lands. My firm is in its 3rd year. We have a team of 7 people, every one of whom I chose carefully and treat with the kind of respect I once wished someone would extend to me. We have clients across multiple industries and a reputation that I am genuinely proud of, not because it sounds impressive, but because it was built entirely on the quality of the work and the honesty of the relationships. Nothing was inherited. Nothing was handed over. Every single piece of it was built from the parking lot up. I do not think about David often. When I do, it is without bitterness, which is something I could not have predicted from where I was sitting 2 years ago. He played a role in my story that I did not ask for and would not have chosen. But the outcome of that role turned out to be something I would not trade. That is complicated and true at the same time. And I have learned to hold complicated, true things without needing to resolve them into something simpler. The office floor happened, the box happened, the elevator happened, and then everything else happened too. The plan at the kitchen table, the first client call, the first yes, the first hire, the first moment I looked at a piece of work and thought, I built this and no one can take it from me. And no one gets to decide what it is worth except the people it serves. That moment, quiet and private and witnessed by no one, was the actual ending of the story that started on the office floor, not the LinkedIn message, though I understand why that feels like the satisfying conclusion. The real ending was the first time I realized I was no longer waiting for someone else to tell me I was good enough. I had stopped needing that. I had built something that made the question irrelevant. You do not need the person who underestimated you to eventually see your value. Their recognition is not the goal, and it is not the reward. The reward is becoming someone whose confidence no longer depends on being recognized by the right people. The reward is sitting at a desk in an office with your name on the door, reading a message from someone who once tried to make you small, and feeling nothing but a mild, almost affectionate certainty that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. That is the ending, not the message, not the reply. The desk, the name on the door, the work that got you there. Build that and let everything else follow.